Welcome to new topic, Introduction to Exception Handling. Very interesting topic. Java is very powerful because of its exception handling. This is one of the primary reasons why Java language is so powerful. This is the agenda for today. Let us know why this topic is required. The class hierarchy of exception handling, and we'll try to know the importance of exception handling with examples, very nice examples, and then we'll see class hierarchy. Understanding this class hierarchy is very important. Once this is done, then we'll try to know three important keywords that are most widely used during implementation of any Java application using exception handling. These keywords: try, catch, finally. These three keywords. We'll try to use them. We'll try to know the importance of each keyword and how to use them through example. Okay, at least two programs we are going to see with respect to exception handling, and we'll close this topic here. We'll start. Before I get into the exception handling, I need to formally define it. Exception, according to English dictionary, it's a bug, it's a problem, it's an error. These are the synonyms of exceptions. Exception handling means you are going to handle the problems or errors that are going to take place in the application. To run your Java application smoothly, you need help of exception handling. It means that developer need not to write any additional code. Exception handling is very huge, and it is already available as part of Java installation. You should have already got a package, a fundamental package called as java.lang. Java.lang provides all the classes that are required for exception handling. A developer need not to write any additional code to handle the errors. Every exceptions are already done. I mean, most of the exception handling is done within the Java. You being a developer should learn how to make use of that handling techniques. Before we get into the concepts, we'll try to know what are the basic types of errors or exceptions that takes place in Java program. There are two types of exceptions. One is checked and another is unchecked. Checked and unchecked. Checked exception is nothing but a compile time error. For an example, while writing a program, if you made a mistake like semicolon was not given, or else system.out.println, you have wrongly typed system and the keyword of system was wrongly typed, or you did not keep dot system.out, okay, you did not keep the dot. Some mistake, some typing error that if you have done, these kind of typing mistakes according to the Java grammar, if you do not follow any grammatical mistakes according to the Java programming language, if you have done, then these kind of mistakes are called as checked mistakes, and these mistakes are very easily identified during compile time. Checked mistakes are the exceptions which are caught during compilation. So one need not to worry about these kind of mistakes, because very often every developer does that. Because while typing programs, we may mistakenly do something. Instead of giving semicolon, we might give a colon. That will be regarded as a compile time error. So these kind of mistakes can be very easily identified during compile time error. So we need not to worry about these kind of checked exceptions at all. What is important is a thing that is visible in red color: unchecked exceptions. This is what we need to worry about. Unchecked exceptions are not caught by Java compiler. Java compiler don't understand them. Unchecked errors is the logical errors or runtime errors. They occur during execution of the program, not during compilation. Okay, it means that unchecked error is something different, which is not just like typing mistakes like a semicolon or system.out.println dot is missing. Not these kind of things. These kind of things are done during compilation itself. They are caught during compilation itself. But there are some dangerous mistakes that we might do, that a programmer may do with knowledge or without knowledge while writing the programs. Those exceptions are runtime exceptions, runtime errors. They are not caught during compilation. These are very dangerous. They affect the program execution a lot. Logical errors will affect the program execution, but that is different. Logical errors are something different from the runtime errors. I'll show you now the examples of runtime errors. These errors can be caught during execution. If they are not caught, then they affect the Java application. So it's very important to catch the runtime errors. So what is this runtime error? Now we'll see. So before I get into the next topic, where I am going to deal about exceptions in detail, I'll tell you one thing. Checked exception means compile time error. Okay, unchecked exception means runtime error. If somebody asks you what is an exception, your answer should not be like exception means an abnormal condition that takes place in Java program. Exception means always runtime error only. You should not consider a compile time error as an exception. Nobody says that. But to primarily categorize the types of errors, we have two categorizations. One is checked errors and then other is unchecked errors. Unchecked error is an exception. Exception means runtime error that takes place during execution of the program. Okay, please keep this point in your mind strongly. Please keep it. Now we are going to see some simple examples to make you comfortable with runtime errors. What do you mean by runtime error? I have taken 5 pretty easy examples where you will be very easily understanding, okay, this is what the runtime error is. Now look at here. One by one we are going to see. Here you will understand why exception handling is required. You, after seeing all these 5 examples, you will accept, okay, exception handling is very powerful and it is very supportive to develop real-time applications. You will accept this fact. Now you look at here. In your Java program, in case if your number is divided by 0, okay, you might think, sir, I'm a programmer, I know what numbers I give in my program, why will I give denominator 0? No, you won't be giving, but think that denominator is generated by some formula. You don't have an idea what kind of value that formula is generating. By mistake, that formula has generated a 0. Now let us imagine that your numerator is divided by that 0, which is generated from different source. It's not that you have done a mistake. Okay, you have written some formula for the denominator. That denominator unfortunately becomes 0. You don't have an idea. Okay, at some point it becomes 0. This is very serious problem. It's a serious problem. The answer goes to infinity. If you try to divide any number with 0, the answer is infinity. Okay, you can't leave your application to run unlimited amount of time. You need to stop it. Okay, it's an exception. You need to catch this exception. These kind of exceptions are called as arithmetic exceptions. So here, this kind of arithmetic is not allowed. Numerator, whenever numerator is divided by the 0, which is denominator, is a serious problem. It's a serious arithmetic problem. You need to catch it. What kind of exception it is? Arithmetic exception. Right? So one simple example. Another example you see here. The second example, you have taken a string S. S is an object, string is a class. Okay, S is just a variable. Say variable whose type is string, and it is initialized with null. And what are you trying to do is that you are trying to see the length of string S. What is length of string S? You haven't placed at least one character in S, you made it as null. There is nothing in S, you did not place at least one character, then S is initialized with null and you are trying to see the length of string. This is also one of the serious problems that takes place whenever you are using arrays, strings. Okay, these kind of exceptions takes place, one of the serious problems, and you need to catch these problems. This problem is called as null pointer exception. The exception name is null pointer exception. This exception takes place whenever you place null value in the pointer, and if you try to access the value of that pointer variable, then this exception occurs. Okay, already there is nothing in the pointer variable S or an object reference S, and you are trying to see the length, or if you try to access the value of S, then this null pointer exception you will get. Okay, right. Next, generally this kind of this is very much happens. I mean, this exception is very often takes place in many applications. Look at here, there is an array. I have declared an array. Okay, the array length is 5. The array length is 5, and you are trying to initialize a of 10. A of 10 is not an existing block within the array. You have taken only 5 blocks. A of 10 is not an existing place in an array A. How do you place 50 in it? If you try to do it, it's an exception. Okay, you need to catch these kind of serious problems. This exception is called as array index out of bound exception. If you try to access any location which is not registered within the memory, then that kind of error is called as array index out of bound. Okay, so this is also one of the serious problems. very often occurs, and very easily we can catch these kind of exceptions using Java exception handling. The name of this exception is array index out of bounds exception. Okay. Now 4 and 5 theoretically orally I'll explain you, because if I wanted to show that kind of exception I need to write 4 or 5 lines of code, which will make you difficult for you to understand. But in simple English statements I can tell you, I can explain you point number 4 and point number 5. Point number 4, let us imagine that you are playing with files. Playing with files using Java program, very often we need to do it in real time. It means that you might get a situation where you need to open a file and you need to read the file and you need to take input from the file. And there are many situations where you need to write output to the files. Okay, some might be doing that as part of your mini projects also. I'm pretty much sure that this is routine activity in every development. I mean in any software development, playing with files. Okay, using files, it's a routine thing. Using Java program, if you try to open a file which is not existing at all, okay, that file is not existing, and if you try to open it, then this is an exception. How do you expect your Java program opens a file which is not there? This is not compile time error. Do you understand? There's nothing to do with Java grammar. Grammar is perfect. Okay, the statement whatever you talk in English is perfect, but it is meaningless. Just imagine. Okay, just relate this sentence with this point number 4. Here there's nothing to do with compile time error. There is no problem with compile time error. There is no compile time error. Imagine that your program has not done any kind of syntax errors. Syntax error is compile time error. They are caught during compilation time. But the serious problem is that you are trying to open a file. Java just checks syntactically whether you have written that statement correctly or not. You have written the statement correctly, you have provided the file name, but that file name is not there in your computer. It's not the problem of your Java programming language, it's the serious problem of your application programming. So this kind of error has to be caught. Okay, don't worry, exception handling is very powerful. You can catch this kind of exception. The name of this exception is file not found exception, and this is related to IO exceptions, input and output exception, one of the biggest classes with respect to exception handling, IO exceptions. We can very easily catch different types of exceptions that are related to input and output. Whenever file input problem is there, if file is not available, then this exception is thrown outside. File not found exception. Similarly, while writing Jdbc programming, what do you mean by Jdbc programming? Whenever your Java is interacting with databases, like you have some database tables in MySQL, and if you wanted to insert some values in it, and if you wanted to extract some values from that kind of programming is called as Jdbc programming. So to interact with any kind of relational database management systems according to computer science database management systems, you might have already studied, there is a special purpose language called as SQL. SQL should be used. Okay, it's not that Java cannot directly interact with the database. Java uses SQL. The Java plus SQL is nothing but Jdbc programming. Okay, so Java uses SQL. If you make any SQL syntax, it's not the responsibility of Java. Java doesn't check your SQL syntax. If you try to extract some records from the table in the database, if the table is not existing, it's not the responsibility of Java to check whether the table is existing or not. You being developer, you should have an idea, and if by mistake, if you try to write an SQL code, select star from table name demo. Demo is not available in such case, but the statement you kept in Java program, now it is going to be a serious problem in case if you did not catch this exception, because the application developer will not be knowing what went wrong. To tell the application programmer what went wrong, you need to catch the exception. Whenever any object relating to MySQL, if it is not found, then you will get an exception that is related to SQL exception. Any exceptions that happens at backend, that means in the database, then you will get an exception, SQL exception. For an example, SQL syntax is there, insert into values. For an example, you have typed wrongly, insert into value, it's you missed S there. Okay, it's a syntax problem. But is this syntax problem of Java or SQL? It's not the syntax problem of Java. So during compile time, these kind of errors will not be caught. These kind of exceptions we need to catch during execution time using a class called as SQL exception. Come on, what are the 5 different exceptions that we have learned now? One is arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number 3, array index out of bound exception, file not found exception, SQL exception. You know, these 5 are the most important exceptions that takes place very often during development of any kind of Java application. Okay, so now I think you should have got some idea what is an exception and why do you need to handle it. Okay, this is the purpose. Within these examples, I think hopefully you should have understood. When these kind of errors are called as runtime errors, they create a serious problem if you did not catch them. You might ask me, sir, what happens if we did not catch this exception while executing the program? Programmer will not be knowing, the end user who is executing this program will not be knowing what kind of problem caused the abnormal execution of the program. Okay, whenever an exception has occurred, your program will terminate execution. Okay, there's nothing to how do you expect your program will execute whenever you have an array has just 5 places and if you try to insert a value at 10th place? It's a serious problem. Your execution stops there. When an execution stops there, you being a developer, a Java developer, you need to know what kind of problem has occurred. Who has to help you? Who has to tell you that array index out of bound has occurred? Who has to tell you? The thing that tells you this kind of hint is exception handling in Java. If you use this exception handling in Java, then if you get an exception, then Java it's now the responsibility of Java will catch that error and will tell you this error is occurred during runtime. Okay, if you by mistake if you type any mistake like semicolon is not given, how Java compiler is telling us? Very beautiful, right? Java compiler, it tells you in so and so line you missed this semicolon, please correct it for further execution. It tells during compile time. So in runtime also, if you want some hints and help from Java to guide what kind of things went wrong for abnormal execution of the program, then you need to use exception handling. If you don't use this exception handling, then you can't catch that error. You won't be knowing what went wrong. Okay, right. Hopefully you should have understood now the importance of exception handling. Now we'll see the class hierarchy. Now the default package of Java is java.lang. I talked a lot about Java packages. We have done already 2 lessons on Java packages. We talked a lot. Enough we talked. Okay, so in those lessons I told you that there is one default package you need not to import, that is called as java.lang, to provide basic fundamental functionality to write the programs. For an example, the simple IOs like output function println and the class creation and object creation, the code that is related to these things, and primitive data types code, and all these definitions are there in a package called as java.lang. One need not to write import statement for java.lang, and writing that exclusively outside, as a first statement import java.lang will not create any problem, but unnecessary thing. You need not to write that line. Even though you don't write it, it is included. Okay, it's just like hash include std.h line in your C language. It's a default line, import java.lang.start. That means all the thing that is related to lang has to be imported. Everything that is required for your basic execution of program will be imported automatically. That package is java.lang. So fortunately, exception handling is part of that package. So in order to include exception handling, you need not to import any additional packages. It is already readily available in java.lang. In java.lang package, there is one important class called as object. In this object has a subclass called as throwable. Okay, from here whatever you are going to see is very, very important. Throwable has 2 subclasses. One is exception and other is error. We don't talk anything about error. So there are some errors which are not related to our application programming, serious errors like hardware failure, network failure, and whenever you are doing socket programming, you know, if there is a problem with network, it's not the problem of Java program or your application, it's the problem of the network. So those kind of so many different types of errors will be there, and hardware related, virtual memory related things, and internal components of your hardware, if they fail, then your application fails. There are serious errors that takes place, but we don't talk about these errors. We will talk about only exceptions. Okay, so This class has two subclasses, one is error and other is exception. What is important for is this exception class. Under this exception class, what are there are very important for us. There are so many subclasses in it. The subclass is IO exception. We have seen now already one example, file not found exception is related to this class IO exception. And Sql exception, this example also we have seen. Apart from these two classes, there is one base class, one important class called as runtime exception. Under runtime, these exceptions comes under. Okay, there is a class called as arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number format exception. Number format, if you wrongly give any number format, if you have done anything, that's not a compile time error. That's a serious runtime error that has to be caught using number format exception. So exception handling is very big. There are so many inbuilt classes. Everything cannot be demonstrated as part of introduction. To make you understand only basics, I have taken very important things that are related to introduction to start up the basic programming using exception handling. Okay, this is the class hierarchy. Of course, there are so many internal classes that I am not going to discuss. So within the IO exception also there are so many subclasses. Within the Sql exceptions there are so many other things. Everything are not unboxed here itself. We cannot unbox everything right at our first class that is related to exception handling. We might have exception handling for the classes. Only if time permits we'll do that. And try to understand. To acquire basic knowledge you need to know the basic classes, the important classes at least case. There is one base class called as exception class. Under exception class there are some subclasses called as IO exception, Sql exception, arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number format exception. Okay, and we don't mind much about the errors. These errors are we don't talk about these errors. Of course we can handle errors using throwable class, but we don't talk anything that is related to errors. We talk about exceptions here. Okay, so in your exam if you get any question, drawing this diagram is very important. Remember, throwable is a class. Throwable is a main class which has subclasses exception and error. Under exception class we have all these subclasses. Okay, and throwable class belongs to one important class. The name of that class is called as object. Object is a parent class for everything. Right, you're done. Now we'll see the general format of writing a Java program using exception handling. If you want to catch an exception, of course, if you are writing any program that is related to real world problem, if you are trying to solve, then definitely you need to use exception handling. You can never find a single simple Java program without using exception handling. Exception handling is very much required. I told you the importance. Now you should have understood its importance, and it is there in every Java program. Alright, now we need to learn what is the general format. If you wanted to include exception handling in your Java program, then what kind of additional things that you need to do apart from the fundamental programming, whatever you have learned, what are the additional things that you need to do? Okay, here you are going to see three important keywords: try, catch, finally. I repeat, try, catch, finally. Right now, in any Java program, if you are implementing Java exception handling, you will find the Java code is divided into three blocks. This block is called as try block. This block is called as catch block. This block is called as finally block. Okay, and if you have used these keywords, it means that you have successfully implemented exception handling in your program. Your program can now smoothly run without any kind of exceptions. This is the meaning. Now, how to use it? If you have any doubt within the code where exception may occur. For an example, whenever you are using an array with some size, and if you are not sure, assigning a value may go out of bound, and if you have any doubt of array out of bound exception, or any arithmetic exception like divided by 0 or file not found exception, if you doubt that at this particular place I may get exception, because it's the responsibility of programmer to predict, okay, this is the place where some exception may takes place. Now you should give chance to Java to catch that exception. How do you give chance? Means keep that code within this block, try block. Now Java tries, exclusively it tries, it looks for any exceptions only if you keep that piece of code in try block. And this try block you can write wherever you want within the code. Okay, within the Java function code, within the Java function, where you generally implement the code in the Java function, Where do you write Java function? Inside the class. Okay, so inside any function, if you're writing any code and if you doubt any piece of code where you are expecting some errors, runtime errors, then you should keep that piece of code in try block. Okay, and in case if an exception occurs, immediately the control will be given to catch block, and whatever the remaining program is there, wherever the exception occurs, immediately the Java execution stops there, because execution done line by line interpretation. If line is perfect, then only you will be taken to the next line. If there is at any particular point of time, if you have 10 lines, at line number 5 you got an exception, line number 6 will not be executed. This is what the execution of the program is. This is what the interpretation is, right? So during execution, wherever the exception occurs, there the execution stops. So here, if you get any kind of exception, the execution stops and immediately the control is given to catch block. In the catch block, you will catch that exception and you will give some argument name. Using this argument name, you can type this argument using system.out.println. Now you will be knowing what kind of exception you got. Okay, now you will get back to the program and you will clear that exception and you will retry the code again. Okay, so this is just to get help from the Java to know what kind of exception you got, whether you got exception or not. In case if you got any kind of exception, what kind of exception it is. To get this kind of help, we need to use Java exception handling. The important thing is that if you have used a try block, there should be a catch block. It is really meaningless to have a try block without a catch block. If there is a try block, there should be a catch block. It is must. Okay, you are trying to catch an exception. If you get an exception, then that control has to give in to the catch block. If there is no catch block, then how do you catch that one? It's very mandatory. Okay, having a catch block for a try block is mandatory, and at the same time you cannot have a catch block without a try block. Do you understand? The moment you are closing the try block, immediately there should be a catch block. Please fix this one. Lock it. Lock this statement. The moment wherever you close the try block, the preceding statement is catch block. The immediate preceding should be the catch block. Please remember this statement strongly. Okay. Now, in your program, if you have some doubt, okay, for an example, you have some program of 10 lines. The first 5 lines of code you have doubt whether exception occurs or not. That first 5 lines of code you can keep in the try block. What about the next 5 lines of code? You are pretty much sure that exception will never takes place. That piece of code you need to keep in finally block. Okay, in finally block is a piece of code that you will keep whether exception occurs or not. This will be executed definitely. It means that what Java does, whatever the piece of code that you kept in finally will be executed first. Okay, and make sure that should not be any dependency of the statements that you have kept in the try block with the finally block. They should not, the statements should be independent to each other. So that finally block will be anyhow executed whether you got an exception or not. Whether you get an exception or not, this block will be executed definitely. And having a finally block is not mandatory. It's an optional. Okay, there is one facility. You need not to have a catch block whenever you have a try block. There is one case, if you have a finally block, then you can skip the catch block, and of course by skipping so you will not be knowing what kind of error you got. Okay, but still you can try it. Keep only the following points in your mind. If there is a try block, maintain a catch block. This is a good thing. And if you have some piece of code, irrespective of exception occurs, whether exception occurs or not, if you have some statements to be executed compulsory, then you need to keep them in finally block. Okay, that's all. It's nothing more than this. Okay, now like if else, if there is if else is not mandatory, right? But here catch is mandatory. The difference. And nested if else, like nested if else, you can have nested tries. Okay, for every try there will be a catch. Make sure this point always. Okay, within this try block, okay, within this try block I can write another try also. Make sure for that sub try there is an immediate catch block inside it, inside this try itself. Inside this try itself, if you have written any try, a subtry, then there should be a catch for that subtry within this try block. Okay, just like if else. Okay, inside if you can write any number of times if statements. For each if statement you can write an else statement if you want. In the same way here, within the try block you can write any number of try blocks. They can be nested any number of levels. Good, great, we are done. Theoretical part is done. Now at least 2 programs we are going to see on exception handling, where I'll be using this try block and catch blocks. Right, look at here, it's a simple program. The class name is exception demo1 is a class name. It's a very first program that we are going to see with respect to Java's exception handling. And here is a function void display inside this class exception demo1. I have taken an array. The array size is 5. I have initialized 5 values. It means that the size of array is 5. Dynamically the size was 5. Okay, when the statement is getting executed, 1 2 3 4 5 elements is created, a block is created, and the starting address of the first element will be given to a reference variable a. It's just like a pointer variable, right? Now the size of this array is 5. Knowing this fact, now let's try this piece of code that is kept in try block. This is how we need to use the try block. And inside the try block, I'm trying to see the value of a of 8. Is it possible to see the value of a of 8? My array has only 5 elements. How can I see the 8th element? It's impossible, right? So I need to take help. That's why I doubt that this statement may not be executed. That's why I kept in try block. So now you will be taking the help of inbuilt exception handling of Java. Notice that I did not import any java.lang package is not imported because it is imported by default. And there is one more line, system.out.println. This line you look at here. If an exception occurs here, this line never executes. Please try to understand, this line never executes. Okay, system.out.println. If there is exception, this line cannot be executed. Imagine if there is no exception up to this line will be executed doubtlessly. Okay, and if there is exception if at this particular line, then this line will not be executed. Now after trying a catch block, I told you that immediately the statement that should be preceded is catch block. Inside catch block, okay, I doubt that this kind of exception is a simple arithmetic exception. Here it's not an arithmetic exception. Just a minute. According to the program that we have taken there, what is the exception name? It's an array out of bound exception, right? Array out of bound exception. You need to know. Okay, it doesn't matter that even though you have taken it as an arithmetic expression, you should be able to see the type of exception that you got here. Okay, right? Let us use some exception here and let us. Right, in case this is an exception that you got, right? You got an exception here. In case if there is an exception, the resultant thing that you can see using an argument e here. E is an argument for an exception class, for this class. So for this class, E is an argument. You will be knowing what kind of exception that you got if you print it using system.out.println. Finally, you have one block. Though you get exception or not, this line will be executed definitely. System.out.println, though you get exception or not, you can see this line, right? So it means that irrespective of this try block and catch block, this block is executed. So finally I created an object X for this class exception demo1, and using that object I have called a method called as display, so to see the execution. Now let's compile this program and let's see the execution. So program name is exception demo1.java. We have successfully compiled it. Now let's execute it. Look at here. I told you whatever you keep inside the finally block, that statement will be executed as it is. you got this exception. I mean, this is kept under system.out.println. Okay, system.out.println means this line here. Okay, because you got an exception, right? Because in my array I have 5 elements only. I am trying to see this line here. I got an exception. Immediately at this line, the control is given to this catch block. It's just like a function call. Just like a function call, if you get an error, immediately the function call, immediately the control is given to this function. So catch is just like a function, and this block will be executed. This block of statements will be executed, whatever you keep. So what did I keep? If you get an exception, then there is an argument that this argument E will get what kind of exception you got, and I need to print that E, system.out.println, and here I have written you got this exception E. Okay, that's why you are seeing here you got this exception. What is the exception that you got? java.lang.array index out of bounds exception. This is the exception that you got. Okay, index 8 out of bounds of length 5. See how clearly Java has helped us in finding an runtime error. Let us imagine now, in case if you did not find this kind of exception, it is going to be a serious problem during developing such any real-time applications. You cannot successfully develop the real-time applications. Exception handling is such a powerful thing. Okay, unfortunately runtime errors cannot be caught by during compilation time. They are caught during execution time only. So inbuilt packages, classes, functions should help us to identify the exceptions that takes place in our programs. So using Java exception handling, we can do these kind of things. Okay, by knowing this, immediately I can correct. Being a developer, I'll get back to this one. Okay, I'll just make sure that this will never exceed the 5. Okay, now in case knowing this fact, what did I do means I corrected this one. Now I'll make my index will never go out of this 5. It could be anything 0 to, okay, I have 5 elements, 0 to 4, the value can be anything. But beyond 4, the value cannot be anything. 5, 6, 7, that will become array out of bounds. Now AR4 is valid. Now exception should not be thrown. In case if I wanted to see AR4, what is AR4 value? 5. 5 has to be printed, and since this line there is no exception, the next line has to be executed. Now you should see, if there is exception, the line cannot be executed. In my previous case, the finally statement, though you get exception or not, you should have seen this. Okay, the last line is printed, though you got exception, array out of box, this line is executed from finally block. I told you many times that finally block, whatever the piece of code that you keep, irrespective of exception that you got, irrespective of error you got, that block will be executed. Okay, but make sure the lines that you keep under finally should be independent of the lines that you kept in the try block. Then you can see the successful execution of finally block. Fantastic. So now we did not make any kind of error. There's no problem. AR4 I am seeing, AR4 value is 5. Array index out of bounds exception will not take place here, and the second line has to be printed. If there is exception, this line cannot be executed. This line has to be printed. Now catch block will not be printed, will not be executed, because there is no exception in this case. Finally block anyhow, that is executed. Now let's compile this program and execute it. Compilation is successful. Compilation is always successful, though you have runtime error or not. Okay, because runtime error is never related to compilation. Now we are executing this one. The moment we have executed, as expected, there is no exception that has taken place here, because my final AR4 value is 5. 5 is printed, and the second line you can see, if there is no exception, if there is exception, this line cannot be executed, because in the previous line there is no exception. That's why this line is printed. Okay, though you get exception or not, you can see this line is from finally block. That's all, guys. This is what the exception handling is. I have taken only one simple example with the array index out of bounds, and you can work it out. Simple examples like other examples, arithmetic division. Whenever you are trying to divide any numerator with 0, you can catch some file related input output related exceptions using IO exception handling, file not found exception. Some pretty simple examples, you can try it out, and you can create a try block inside try block, and make sure for each internal try block there should be a catch block. By maintaining so, you can do it. You can nest any number of try blocks, and you can catch different exceptions within a single program. You can catch any number of exceptions, meaning that you can write any number of try blocks. Within a try block, you can write any number of try blocks. For each try block, make sure that you write a catch block. So by maintaining so, you will definitely become a very good Java developer. Okay, exception handling is not a thing that is related to Java alone. Any object-oriented programming language has to support this facility, and you should have already studied such kind of thing in Python in case if you are good at Python. Otherwise, you have learned here, no worries, right? Great, we are done.